Welcome to another conversation with the Apostate Sisters. I'm Patty, and I'm here with my sister Nancy, and we grew up in a doomsday cult called the Worldwide Church of God. We're also nerdy about history and culture, but critical of religion, so get ready to get mad or to nod your head in agreement as we embark on today's topic. So today, we're taking a look back at a conference we attended at the beginning of May. We went to the SAFE conference here in Portland, Oregon, that's all about helping cult survivors deal with the aftermath of what they endured. We thought the most impactful session of the day was one with Empathy Paradigm Consulting. Empathy Paradigm is run by Anna Clark Miller. She's a therapist working primarily with people who have endured spiritual and religious abuse. One of the main tools that Anna used for her presentation was this wheel of power and control as it relates to religious and spiritual organizations. The SAFE conference is run in part by a woman named Ashlyn Hilliard, who runs a business called People Leave Cults, also working in the sphere of helping people through their religious trauma. So if you've been with us over the last few months, you'll know that we have been covering the life and influences of Herbert W. Armstrong, who was the leader of our particular cult. I'd like to give another shout out to Nancy, whose amazing work pulling together a timeline of his life made that whole series come together. So thanks, Nancy, for all your work on that.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. A lot of research, but man, was that enlightening. Yeah, I actually had a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah.
But a lot of the feedback that we got from people, some people were saying, no, this actually isn't a cult. How do you know that the Worldwide Church of God and its offshoots are cults? And so we thought, well, why don't we break down what a cult actually is? So we'll go through that today. So
Oh, we're back to coffee.
I am looking forward to going through this topic, Pats, because we've been connecting with a lot of people in organizations that not only cults, but organizations of very high control, whether it's an abuse situation, having a parent that is controlling and manipulative. A lot of people need healing, whether some of them know it or not. And I think it's very important that this religious and spiritual wheel that we're going to be talking about today, I think something will resonate with people. There's a lot of different factors that go into it. It's not just a simple answer like, oh, this is the definition of a cult. Sure, there's that, but there's a lot of moving pieces. So I will just read the top portion here describing what this wheel is that we are going through, and people can follow along if they want to. This is empathy paradigm therapy. All right. And it is the religious and spiritual power and control wheel. So the power control wheel was created by Domestic Abuse Intervention Project. And it was created to demonstrate the power and control dynamics that play in abusive relationships. Each spoke of the wheel represents a different reason why a survivor might feel trapped in a relationship with their abuser. This is our adapted version of the power and control wheel to apply to abusive religious groups, spiritual groups, and cults. And so we will go through them one by one. If you want to go ahead and kick us off, Patty.
Yeah, thanks. I know when you and I went to this session, we were both entirely blown away by this wheel and the
Yep.
way that it gets under what's going on when abusers interact with people. And
Right.
I felt like, you said that this was adapted from a domestic abuse wheel, like an understanding of how that coercive control happens. I can almost see these things played out throughout our society in a way too, to
Oh, in
keep
so many ways. So many
right,
ways.
to keep like the gears turning of how we all have to work together. Except the first word on this wheel is coercion. And I can't help but feel like that one in particular has just way more broad-ranging implications than the spiritual power and control, right? Everything from parent-child relationships, boss-employee relationships, that kind of thing. But
Everything.
obviously, everything, it's true. But obviously, today we're really focusing in on the spiritual aspect because we've just gone through this whole series kind of detailing out how the leader of our cult used these tactics to control our parents.
And it's amazing. They were talking in that class too. Anna, she's a very eloquent speaker too. She was just so easy to follow, and I really related to what she was talking about. Every single point that she had brought up, I just thought Herbert W. Armstrong. It,
Herbert W. fucking Armstrong.
and not only him, I can see these details in so many people throughout my life and realize like, oh man, I was being controlled and manipulated so hard. Companies that I worked for, schools, certain teachers. Anna had mentioned something like, well, these are the people all around you that might be manipulating you, and you have no idea.
So I'm going to go ahead and jump into the wheel if you're ready there,
Yeah,
Nancy.
let's go
Um,
through it.
as I mentioned, the first item on the wheel is coercion. So coercion being used to keep people in control.
Yeah.
Something that was actually really surprising to me, too, about how this wheel can be applied is that at the conference, there were people talking about not only the spiritual abuse, but also therapy abuse. Yeah. So the idea that a therapist who kind of ends up in a position of power and control over someone can also use these tactics to
Right.
maintain that control, like over their client. So it's really sad and amazing how able we are as humans to figure out how to control each other.
Right. And that's the point I actually wanted to bring up too, is Anna in the class had mentioned like, how do all these people know the tactics to be
Yes.
able to control and manipulate people? It's like
No
they're all on the
shit.
same page and they know from a psychological standpoint how it works, and they know exactly the right boxes to tick. They know how to press people to gain that control and gain that trust so that they can get what they want out of people.
I guess to that point, I try not to think, oh, humans are just evil, right? Because that
Right.
harkens back to like original sin and whatever, born in sin, and I reject that idea. And so I have to think that the fact that so many humans have figured out how to do these things to control other people, it's like, well, watching how the world works and figuring out what gets you what you want, I think some very good people can arrive at these control methods almost unintentionally.
Right. And I think a lot of them are.
I mean, definitely there are still some who are intentional, but even those
Right.
who are doing it intentionally, I think have ample room to convince themselves that they're doing the right thing or they're actually doing something good. And so it's kind of important to have these ideas out there in the world so that people are aware of it and can kind of see themselves and see what they're doing if they're in fact, engaging in these tactics toward other people unknowingly.
Right. Well, and that's where the Bible comes into play too. When people wholeheartedly believe the writings of this ancient religious book or mythological book, I should say,
Yep.
they think they're doing something good by pushing it on other people. Say, no, this is correct. Believe me, I am doing something great.
And it was
You're
pushed
controlling.
on them. So that's how it
Right.
happens.
Hmm. Yes.
So talking about it is how we break those fucking chains.
Right. We need to be cycle breakers. Absolutely.
Yeah, cycle breakers. I actually get a kick out of that idea because there's the whole thing in the Bible of like, if someone does this, then God will take out his wrath on their descendants to the whatever generation, which is
Right.
just so gross. And it's like, well, maybe they were noticing something though that really does happen, and that's just the kind of natural transference of traumas from parent to child. And so it can
Right.
look probably like, oh, God's put a generational curse on that family. Well,
Jesus
no, that's
fucking
I
Christ.
right. I think that's how that gets thought of, but it's just how humans relate to each other. And so when we're the ones that can call out what we see happening, the harm it's causing, and some sort of direction toward moving away from that ourselves, let alone other people that we might influence, that is us being fucking cycle breakers. And that's what it's all
Yes.
about, right?
Preach, Patty, preach.
Well, all right, let's jump into the wheel so that we all know how to be fucking cycle breakers about this.
And to recognize when this shit is occurring. So, under coercion, the first point here we have is exclusion and abandonment, which can include things like loss of community, cutting off contact with your family, friends, acquaintances, eternal isolation, and also damnation.
I mean, how can you not start with hell?
Hmm.
I can't think of any more coercive tool than, hey, you, human on planet Earth, guess what? If you don't do all these things I say in the way I say to do them, you might have an okay life here, but then you're going to spend eternity being freaking tortured. What?
It's
Yeah, that's
absolutely disgusting. The whole concept of hell is an absolutely disgusting thing. Never should have happened. It should never have been created. What a way to scare people. Doing
what a way to control people. And that was the
right,
whole point. Well, I mean, our church growing up, they talked about the lake of fire, but it was
right,
temporary, not forever torment. And then I think after 1,000 years in the lake of fire, you would be annihilated, so just made no more. And
right.
that was supposed to be the big scary thing. And now, to my way of thinking, I'm like, okay, I think that's kind of how it happens anyway. So that's fine. Just annihilate me. Sounds better than eternal
Yes.
torment. But the thing is, you don't even have to get all the way to torment to
Hmm.
really like control someone with fear. Because if you tell them, hey, you do that and you're going to be kicked out of the church, well, for some
Hmm.
people, that means all of their family and friends. And so it's social death, not like a fire death, but I mean, that's a scary place because we're communal animals. And if you're threatened with being kicked out, and so what are the words? Excommunicated, shunned, marked, that's your whole sense of safety, right? Like that's the name of this conference, safe. That's their whole sense of safety. If you realize, oh, all of the people in my life are going to be taken away, and therefore all of my socializing, all of my places to stay, maybe even the people who are providing food and shelter for me, right?
Right.
Like that is some pretty huge things to hold over someone's head to get them to do what you want. Probably if you're in that situation, you've been conditioned your whole life too, which I'm sure we'll get to be afraid of things that are outside of that.
Fear of the rest of the world, especially for people like you and I, Patty. In Armstrongism, we were taught such evil things about the world. We don't want to be of this world. And hey, if we're cut off from this, true children of God, well, what are we left with? We're in this world that is a very scary place. And then the next one on the list is, oof, one of my least favorites, punishment and discipline, which includes things like public humiliation, maybe demotions at a job or in your church. And physical harm is a big one. And I'll
Yeah.
add mental harm to that as well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I
Mhm.
mean, physical harm, the most obvious there is, well, a domestic abuse situation. We understand what's going on there, but we're not really far away from thinking that spanking children is an okay way to coerce them or to coerce them to do what we want.
Right.
There are definitely still parents that think that's the way, even
Hmm.
though we have all these studies to show the psychological harm that comes from using corporal punishment on a child.
Is there any study out there that shows, oh, yeah, it's a good thing to physically abuse someone
Oh, fuck no.
to get them to learn? Nothing,
No, of
correct?
course not, because it doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. Our brains tend to not be very good at learning new things when they're in fight or flight. And if you're worried that you're going to get your ass smacked or have some privileges taken away from you in your family home or whatever, I mean, that puts you in line pretty quick
Right.
to respond to that punishment or even the threat of punishment.
And I've said it before, us as children, if we are getting physically abused for not obeying, someone who we look at as an authority figure, what happens later on? We get out into the dating world and we start dating someone who's extremely manipulative, controlling, toxic, and the same thing happens. We get physically abused for not obeying. And then all of a
Yep.
sudden we think it's okay because that's what we were taught as children. And I've had people tell me too, like, oh, well, spanking's not physical abuse. Really? It's not. Having your pants ripped down and then screaming and writhing in agony because you're in so much pain and shock that someone who is supposed to love you is completely overstepping your autonomy.
Exactly. It is your body. The only fucking, I'm sorry for all the fucks today. The only
Why are you
fucking thing,
apologizing?
the only thing we come into this world with is our body. We don't own anything else. We don't own other bodies. We shouldn't anyway.
Yeah.
And to be told in no uncertain terms that it isn't yours and that I'm bigger than you, and so therefore I win this game, yuck, yuck.
And children, no doubt. For some reason in this country, especially, it's still okay to physically harm a child on their ass, their bare fucking ass, but you're not allowed to hit their face. I'm like, you're hitting their body either way. What difference does it make what part you are attacking? And is it
Because
okay to do
marks
that
on a
to
face
adults?
make people uncomfortable and you can't see them on an ass.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know, but that's what it seems like to me, and it makes me mad.
I've even heard of some situations where people get into BDSM because it's sort of like taking their power and control back from the abuse that they endured as children. I know the physical abuse we haven't really touched on much in our podcast yet. We will get to it at some point, but that is going to be the hardest thing for me to talk about for sure.
I know. We were talking last night, Nance, and I didn't realize how big the spanking thing was for you still. That when it came up and we were talking about maybe we should do this as a big topic, it was obvious you weren't ready to do it. We're gonna
Wasn't
have to
ready.
unpack some stuff before we can get to that.
I think about all the little children that it's still happening to right now. I can't get into it. I can't
I
get into it
know.
because I'm going to get so mad. I want to
I
save
know.
them all, and all we
I
can
know.
do at least is give our little bit of perception here and try to save as many as possible. Because it is a cycle. Who actually fucking wants to get physically abused as a form of punishment? Punishment is never the answer. How about have a conversation? Tell your children if they are doing something wrong. I'm not saying don't tell them not to touch the stove because it's hot. Explain why. But guess what? They may still do it. As a child, I was
Yep.
constantly told not to do things, and I still did it because even though somebody else told me that, I wanted to be able to figure it out for myself. And that's the only way that I learned.
People might obey, but that is the only way that people learn.
Right.
Or
Right.
like deeply engaging with these ideas in their thoughts, I think too. But yeah, for some things and some people, you just have to try it to really know.
Yeah. Oh, see, I told you. I told you. Like, yeah, so you fucking told me, but guess what? I wanted to figure it out too. I'm not, I
Yeah.
think that's very, very dangerous when we just take we follow rules or advice from someone else without doing the more research on our own. And then for the public humiliation, I mean, I don't know if I really have a good example off the top of my head, but I can see that definitely being some sort of form of punishment for people. I think a person's reputation is very important to the person themselves. They don't want to be seen a certain way by society because, again, that goes back to the first topic we were discussing, the loss of community and abandonment. So the two can
Mhm.
kind of coincide a little bit.
Oh,
If you are
totally.
seen a certain way, somebody says a lie about you and the public believes it, that could also be a form of isolation. So the next one includes outside dangers, and that could be outsider agendas, persecution, worldliness, which is a term that churches like to use, being not of God, but being of this world. Ooh, we don't want that, do we?
Right. The very famous We want to be in the world, but not of the world. And, this one is a strange one. I may have said it before, but I really feel like that whole idea
Making
and the
sense.
fact that we were separated out from being participants in all of the, kind of standard societal norms as far as like
Hmm.
celebrating Christmas and all of those
Right.
things. Like, I knew growing up in no uncertain terms that I was not a part of that. And so I think what it did somewhat to my benefit is it made me sit outside of it and like look at it and try to see what was actually going on. And I think that's why, in some ways, these pieces of the wheel make sense to me as a culture wide problem and not just limited to religious groups, cults, high control things like that.
No, for sure. This is a
Yeah.
very broad topic.
But at the same time, even though I feel like it's maybe kind of good and interesting for me now that I had that experience and I can do that where I look at these things from the outside in,
Mhm.
it also made me feel really like not one of the cool kids. It
Yeah.
made me feel like, oh, I guess everybody else somehow gets to do all those normal things and be normal and cool, and I don't. And
Yeah.
so to know how I fit into this society maybe still isn't clear to me, and I don't know if people who grew up doing all the normal things and going to all the normal schools and all of that grew up and they're like, yeah, hunky dory, just fine. I know where I fit. Or if they're also feeling a little bit disconnected from the society in which they live. But I know for sure it's contributed to my disconnection and struggles to find myself integrated into, organizations and groups that are healthy.
Because again, in a way, fear was associated with your sense of electness. Yes, you were a chosen one of God, and you looked around and seen all these other kids having a great time exploring their curiosities in this world that you couldn't be a part of, but yet you just kept being told, hey, you're important and they are not. You're on this level, they're on that level.
But while we were being treated at this level.
And yet we were miserable too. All those other kids were having a great time and we were miserable. Yet we were supposed to enjoy that. Not enjoy, but you know what I mean? Like we're supposed to
Be thankful.
be thankful. Yeah, something along those lines. But yeah, going back to the worldliness, I think our childhood set me up to be a world traveler and to love and appreciate cultures of this world. I love everything about it. Yeah, sure, I could zero in on the horrible things that happen in this world. There's plenty of them.
Of
But
course.
I also see the good, which majority of it is good because
I
I,
agree.
yes, it was like
I
I had
do.
blinders on to the rest of the world and say, wait a minute, I like this world. It's beautiful with its lakes and its forests and its people and all their different ideas. In a way, we all just want the same things out of life. We want to be loved. We want to be seen, heard, appreciated. We want to feel safe. We want our basic needs met. We want to do
Yeah.
things that bring us joy and bring joy to others.
Yeah. You're bringing up a really good point. There's this list of human emotional needs that I like to reference quite a lot. And it's exactly the things you mentioned. It's all of these needs that every human has. And, we're not going to have all of them fully filled up at all times. But if we go too long with some of those needs not getting met, like if we're lonely for too long or whatever,
Right.
like we will not be doing well within ourselves. And we will subconsciously even be reaching out into our world to try to get those needs met. And when we're not aware of it and not in a healthy place, like the way we reach out, our behaviors when we reach out to meet those needs aren't always our healthiest ways of behaving or our kindest ways of interacting with other people, right? And so being aware of our needs and having the autonomy to understand ourselves and know that we're worthy of having those needs met and a community that we can reach out to that can understand where we're at and be the people who help us meet those needs for ourselves
Mhm.
is where it's at. And so, I think maybe that's going to be the flip side of this wheel of all these horrible ways of interacting and creating community, to understand that when you're doing the opposite of this, you're probably creating a pretty healthy community and a space where people can step back into their own autonomy, and therefore start behaving in a healthy way for themselves, but also interacting with others. And really, when you think about it, that little bit of interaction of one person to all the people they know, that is literally the only way the world changes.
Preach, Pats, preach. And it's funny you mentioned the opposite end of the wheel, because I think that was something that was brought up in the class as well, that
Oh,
they are going to do a wheel that speaks to the opposite of what is power and control, maybe how we can engage with people and maybe
empower them.
we can empower them
Heck yeah.
to know and recognize what their needs are, what their feelings are. And I think people in general are so out of touch with how they feel. If they feel any sort of emotion that is not synonymous with like power and strength or vulnerability, it will get pushed to the side or
It's discomfort. I call it discomfort. We are
yes.
so bad at handling our own discomfort that
Mhm.
we will delude ourselves. We will, get into drugs. We will do all kinds of things to help ourselves not feel the discomfort, right? Because even when we've made a mistake, right? Like the
Yeah.
unhealthy way is, oh, that makes me bad. Oh, I'm a sinner. I've got to hide the fact that I did that. Well, guess what? Then we shove that
Exactly.
shit into our bodies, into our very tissues, when what we could do instead is understand, oh, hey, I'm a human and all I am working with is the things I have up to this point, and so I'm learning. And hey, you want to be a human with me and learn together, right? There are other ways to do this where we don't self mutilate on the emotional level.
As a child, I just got really good at lying because I didn't know how to not fuck up. I just knew to cover it up with lies.
Oh my God, it's because you're human and we all fuck up because we're human.
Mhm.
And that we're not sinners. It just means we're like a carbon-based life form that evolved on this rock flying through space. And so here we are trying to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
Getting more comfortable with our discomfort and being able to sit in it when we need to and just feel it is a skill we could all work on, myself included. Mhm.
It's an ongoing process that could go to our graves with us.
As long as we let go of the self-flagellation of it all, because that's just going to keep hurting us on the inside, right? So if we've taken these messages from our parents or from church leaders and we don't see them for what they are, sit with the discomfort and figure out how we expunge them from our lives, we end up just letting it fester within us. And I swear to you, I think it makes us sick. You
Absolutely. It
know,
affects us physically, I think. Yeah, stress.
yeah, absolutely. I heard a story from a friend recently that he had at one point in his life felt really self-conscious about like his chest size, right? Or, because men are supposed to have like broad chests or whatever, and he didn't really. And so, but that meant is he literally felt stressed about it and would kind of hunch up a little bit to like kind of hide that that wasn't what he thought it needed to be approved in the world. And so it literally caused like a different body shape here in the shoulders. And so it was a whole process of like kind of undoing that, like, oh, I realize I put my hurt and my shame in that place and it made this change to my body. And so there had to be a really intentional backing out of that way of thinking and doing physical therapy to realign how the body was hanging out in space.
That kind of sounds like you and I. Both you and I have had horrible back trouble too. And I remember you saying to me once, I guess I was a teenager at the time, but you said, "Oh, That girl over there kind of looks like you, except you don't walk with that much confidence. And that kind of hit me too. Yeah, you had said that to me. Like, because it was probably true. I think I walked around just kind of hunched and trying to, oh, my boobies. Hunched. I just walked kind of hunched over trying to not be seen. I didn't want
Yes.
to be part of the group.
Well, because
I
it
was
was scary.
hiding.
Groups are
The
scary.
groups are scary, and I was trying to hide, but I think maybe both you and I did that, and now we have tremendous back trouble because of it. My posture was terrible for years.
Right. I mean, posture alone makes a big difference, and your
Right,
confidence affects your posture.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, your sense of self, your sense of autonomy. I mean, right? Like it doesn't get bigger than like the way people can treat us in these ways, these coercive ways, literally affects our physicality.
All right. And the next section here is known as spiritual dangers. So you have your supernatural threats, your doomsday prophecies, like you and I had, as well as like maybe things like demons and evil spirits that you can threaten someone with.
The demons thing really sticks with me a little bit out of this one. It's not that I believe in demons, obviously now, but that shit was so real to me as a little kid. I mean, thankfully,
Mhm.
we had enough of the like angels are real, maybe too, in there, although definitely angels weren't talked about as much as demons were.
No.
Um, so I mean, I remember having times when I'd feel scared and worry about demons, and then I'd like think about angels and imagine that they were right above me in bed, and I'd be like, "Yay, thank you."
Oh, really?
hmm
Yeah.
A little bit, but I mean, I was having nightmares about demons. I
Yeah.
remember in
Same.
one, really? Okay, so one in particular, I was walking through the garage and I turned and there was a cat statue, like a 4 foot high cat statue next to me. It's about how tall I was at the time. And I was looking at it like, oh, I've never seen that. And in the dream, it turns to me and it goes, I am Satan. I mean, granted, yeah,
Wow.
it could have been worse, but that was so scary. That was one of those that I remember waking up and being so afraid that I couldn't actually even call for our parents, where I'd
Mm,
like, did
yeah.
you ever have that? Like it happened to me a lot where I would wake up so terrified from a nightmare that I couldn't even yell for help.
Patty, I have ghost demon type dreams all the time. In fact, my husband wakes
Still?
me up a lot. Now, it's better than it used to be. Some people say it's might be PTSD related to me going overseas, but I also had these when I was young, so I don't think the two are related in that way. But
It
it's
can still be PTSD, maybe
it still
CPTSD.
can be. I'm not saying I don't suffer from it. I think certain aspects are there. Yes, that's something I'm exploring a little bit more. But it's interesting as a child. Again, I was never convinced that a God exists, and I never believed a God exists, and yet I had this terrible fear of demons. I didn't really think about angels at all. It was just demons that I was scared of.
And it's not listed here in the spiritual dangers part of the wheel. But it makes me think about just the idea that God's always watching you, right?
Mhm.
The idea that like you could be as alone as you think you could get, and you're not because God's watching you, right? Oh, so that idea, I don't know if I'm fully over yet, to be
Right.
honest, but that might be because we have like, phones that are always listening. And so maybe I just feel like it's picked up on that energy. But really, it's like the idea of God knows what I'm doing now, except he
Hmm.
doesn't ever seem to actually do anything in the moment about it
Not in the
was
moment,
kind of
no.
weird, especially like once we started, figuring out our bodies or whatever. It's like, well, God knows what I'm doing.
That's almost worse because you're thinking, oh, this God is watching me at all times, but he's not going to punish me right away. But later on down the road, here you have something to look forward to. Getting back to the physical abuse, Pats, I'm just going to touch on it a second. That reminded me of when we were kids. I remember if I had done something wrong, I and I knew I was going to get physically abused for it later once father got home from work. And
Yep.
so if I fucked up during the day, of course, it was never me meaning to. I got to just sit all day for hours on end, knowing that I am going to get beaten that night. Can you
Yes.
imagine like what was going on in our minds during that time? Do you remember that? To like, do you just
I
know
don't
it's
know.
coming?
That was the worst part though. Like you knew you were in trouble. I mean, people laugh about this and I'm like tempted to laugh about it because culturally people laugh about spanking, even though I don't think it's laughable.
It's not.
Um, yeah, but that was what I remember was like those were the worst days. You knew you had truly crossed the line when we heard from mom, okay, I'm going to talk to dad when he gets home.
And we know what that meant.
That meant
Absolutely.
wooden spoon time. That's what it meant.
Mhm. And there were a few times our mother beat us as well, but mostly it was dad. Yeah.
Because,
Anyway.
bigger means more powerful. So he was the biggest,
Yes.
especially since our mother's 5 foot and we passed her up pretty quick.
True. Yes. All right. And now we have the next section. Intimidation. First bullet point here is the leader authority, the chosen status or celebrity treatment, and the one that has the exemption from the rules.
Oh, this sounds like
Oh,
our series on Herbert W. Armstrong.
exactly. The leader authority, that can come in a lot of different forms. It's just whoever thinks they own you.
Well, in the case of our cult and some of the offshoots that still exist,
Hmm.
the leaders, they seem to really get off on like calling themselves Elijah or the witness or like there's it's so stupid. There's like roles in the Bible that supposedly in the end times so and so is going to come back to earth or blah blah blah, and so they just straight up claim that they are that person. Armstrong often claimed that he was God's apostle or whatever. That guy brother Stair, who our parents went to his cult for a while, he
Yep.
literally claimed to be God's end time prophet.
There were so many of those. A lot of religious organizations with the Worldwide Church of God, it was definitely a hierarchy. I mean, you had the members, you had the deacons, you had what, like the assistant pastors, ministers, and then the pastors, and then you had regional directors, and then you had your evangelists, and then you have the pastor general or the apostle.
Yeah, I mean, it operated almost entirely as a corporate structure with like a C-suite and everything.
Oh, very much. And I don't know why it's always been humankind's drive to sort of like keep moving up on this invisible corporate ladder. Like why?
Okay.
Why can't we just collectively as a group make decisions? Why does there always have to be just one authority over everyone else?
I mean, it's a good question, and I can't help but think that it has to go back to just straight up survival, right? Like a almost a pattern that would have gotten established before we had a modern civilization situation going on where like, you talk about survival of the fittest, like that is what was going on, right? There would have been tribal groups vying for resources. And
Yeah.
so if you are in the group or near the leader of the group that has just won those resources, guess what? You and your children are more likely to eat that month. And I
But
would contend so much of this is like when you dig down deep enough, it comes back to that. It comes back to like lizard brain. Like, am I safe? Is there food and shelter?
but then I also have to wonder if people are constantly looking for leaders, does that kind of have to do with the fact that maybe we as people just don't trust our own minds enough? We do instinctively need someone just to tell us what to do because we ourselves don't know.
I don't think that's a set point for humans. I think we've gotten ourselves into that.
Maybe not instinctively, yeah. Just that's how it's been for a while.
Yeah, we've evolved that way. But I agree with you. I would definitely latch onto a model of hey, let's have like some sort of collaborative council, something, or something that looks like actual democracy would be all right with me
Right.
too. I also can't help but notice that the whole exemption from rules thing when it comes to the chosen leader
Mm-hmm.
definitely applied to Herbert W. Armstrong, right? There was like this understanding that there was some sort of pastry he really liked, and it used lard in the making of it. And he was like, I'll just have it. I know that my little people obey my rules, but like, I'm the prophet.
People who make the rules should not be able to be exempt from them. That
Oh, of
is
course
bullshit.
not.
But we see that in governments all the time.
In governments, yeah. I mean, this is you're hitting on that idea that this power and control business isn't just a religious and spiritual situation. It's extended
No.
pretty far.
It is extending, and it's very hard not to steer off of that into the broader topics. I know we're trying to focus mainly on, the cult aspect and but it's high control organizations as well, and that includes governments for sure. The celebrity treatment I wanted to mention as well, because that was also Herbert W. Armstrong being looked at as a celebrity. Our father definitely had to point out the fact that he drove a Rolls Royce when he was driving around England. That just gave him, I don't know, somehow more credibility.
That's why the whole health and wealth religion ideas worked so well. It's like, oh, well, if
Mhm.
you have a
Right.
lot of money, then God must be shining on you, and therefore you must be a good person. Like, how the hell did that happen? That sounds like something that people with money were able to put out into the world, right? And that ties into our whole problem with like great white man history, right? We talk about Revolutionary War. There's like Paul Revere, and he was
Mhm.
this paragon of a human, and he was responsible for the lights, right? One if by sea, two if by land, or whatever, right? That like helped them beat the British. And it's a lie. It's American mythology. It
Mhm.
was not one person that did any of that shit, but yet we hold up that one person as like that person did it. Like, no, by telling stories that way, we're screwing up our chance of recognizing that we all have to work together to make this work.
Sometimes employers, if their employee does something good, they will take credit for it. If their employee does something bad, the employee did that.
Oh, that's so real.
And you want your employees to do a great job for you, but you don't want them to be more knowledgeable than you because of job security and all that. Don't let them overtake you. You want them to be just good enough to make you look good, but you don't want them to look better than you.
If you're a boss, you need to make sure you're maintaining your leader authority.
Well, I think the terms boss and leader, there's a big difference, but yeah.
Well, right, right. But you're saying that like you can look at a boss and they could just as easily use this intimidation through leader authority to
Oh,
control
yeah.
their employees. Yeah,
Mhm.
I
Oh,
agree.
yeah. I've
I
had it
agree.
many times. Yeah. You see it in the military all the time.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, any hierarchical organization.
Corporate America, governments, the military, all of that. And next bullet point, we have the ultimate truth ideology. This is all still under intimidation. And this one includes any sort of sacred teachings or texts and practices that cannot be questioned, aka the Bible.
Right? I was like, oh, wait, texts. You mean literally all of Christianity, all of Islam, all of Judaism, all of anybody who's got a text that they think is like sacred.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I have so many people that get into my face about things that the Bible says, things that I am supposed to be abiding by. I'm like, your book does not control me. It controls you because you have allowed it to control you.
Damn, Nancy.
That pisses me off when people use the Bible to try to control people. I fucking hate it. And I am definitely one of those people, an atheist, of course, but I'm going to sit here and say, I don't think everyone needs to be atheist. Whether the fuck you believe in a God or not is irrelevant. But the moment you use your religion to control other people, we have a problem.
I agree with you. And I would add on to that that I don't think everyone needs to be atheist entirely either. But I do think that as soon as you think there's gods and goddesses controlling shit in the world, I don't know how you can make decisions that are truly going to be unbiased and good for all of humanity or
Right.
your city or whatever it is you're voting on, right? Like, if people believe true things, they're going to make better decisions. If people are walking around here thinking that things are in existence that are not real in any way,
Yep.
I'm sorry, that's going to make life worse for the rest of us.
You're right. I don't know how people can get around that without it having impact to other people in a negative way. We see that as well in within our lawmaking.
Lawmaking is about who has the money to lobby and not about what's good for people.
So next one's special destiny. It includes any divine cosmic purpose for being a part of said group or power by association. I'm a part of this group and therefore I have all these privileges, yada yada.
I mean, I'm sorry, that's just heaven, right?
Well, that includes heaven, yes.
As soon as you read that, I was like, oh, so once again, we're implicating all of religion or all of Christianity. Like, it doesn't have to be a church of high control. I mean, well, what
Mhm.
is high control? I'm sorry if you say you do these things or you don't, or whatever, you're going to go to heaven or hell. I'm sorry, it's instantly high control.
Yeah. It doesn't even have to be high control. It's control. And there
Yeah.
was a girl in the class that I remember she brought up the point of like, well, yeah, this pertains to cults, but doesn't it kind of pertain to like all of Christianity? I mean, she was so like coy about it too, but I'm like, you're not wrong.
No, she wasn't wrong, but it was a strange place to bring that up because as awesome as this conference was, they are actually quite open to people maintaining a faith, maintaining their
Mhm.
Christianity,
Right.
somehow not seeing that there just isn't a way to not have that be high control. I mean, if you don't actually believe it and you just go as like a here's a place that I go and try to be healthy with other people.
But I think that's the majority of them, right?
Oh, that they go and they're not like true believers.
Right.
Yeah, you're probably right. So
Yeah.
yeah, maybe that does make a difference of, like the Lutheran church down the street versus the one where they're gonna, you know, tell you you're unworthy and demand
Mhm.
your loyalty.
It took me quite a few years to realize like, um, people actually go to church fully believing this. They fully believe. That was hard for me to grasp. To me, it's so obviously mythology that I had a hard time getting around that. To be like, no, these aren't just fairy tales to people. They believe this is actual history.
That was a big point for me actually, Nancy, because growing up, I swear I've said this before, but it was like I held two different pasts in my head. It was like I learned
Right.
history about Greece and all of that in school, and I learned about, Rome through the context of the Bible. And it was like, oh, I was keeping them separate in my head, like they were different times and places, but they weren't. And that led to the idea of realizing that the people who believed in Zeus and Athena, the gods and goddesses of Mount Olympus, I was like, oh,
Yep.
well, shit. They literally thought they were real. And
Yep.
now we
They
call it
sure did.
mythology. And so that was like a huge light bulb moment of like,
Mhm.
oh, maybe that's what our God is too.
Pretty fucking obvious to me. I
But
mean,
that's
the
the
entire,
that's the power of this wheel. Like these activities uh, perpetrated on a child, they have no other context to know what the world is.
right.
And so if all of these tools, these ways of coercing and keeping control over a child are employed, it's pretty fucking good.
All right. And the last bullet point under the category intimidation, we have group elitism, the honor of being included and having superiority over outsiders. Woo! Now, with Armstrongism, this was all over the place in those little booklets, the free, colorful booklets that he'd always send out. It always, in a way, started out with, aren't you so glad that you are part of God's true church and blah, blah, blah. It's usually how they started. Just reassuring the people, like, yes, you're in the right place because you are with God's chosen ones. I just want to make that clear to you all. as before you read this material, like you should be so grateful. You are blessed being here.
So disgusting. Well, I mean, if you look back to the origins of the Worldwide Church of God, you recognize that back in the 1930s, the whole thing was elitism of white people. It
Mm-hmm.
was a little bit hidden, but not that hidden in the 30s. I want to say by the 80s, they were doing everything they could to make sure that wasn't realized, that that was where the Worldwide Church of God came from, was a white supremacist organization.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, you know how fear kind of gets looped in with that white nationalism, white supremacy too, because it's like a threat, right? That's how more people are brought into that movement with the idea of, well, hey, you're probably struggling, so we're going to just kind of let you know that there's these brown people who are probably taking away your chances and causing you to have all those issues. But how could that be? Because you're the top dog here. What's going on? You've got to stop that. You've got to stop them because you're the one who needs to be on top. And so it's very easy to literally you're threatening people's children, right? You're threatening their way of life and making them feel like their kids will have less or worse than what they had. And you mentioned earlier the things we all want. And, you know, to add to that, the things we all want is for our children to be happy and healthy and hopefully to have a better life even than we had. And so people who are worried about that already, they're very primed to be afraid that that's going to be taken from them. And the tools then that are used against them are very good at finding that piece of fear and then giving them a place to put it, right?
Right.
Because on top of fear is where anger likes to come in. And if you can tell them, point to a people group to say that people group is now the one that we're going to tell you is responsible for taking away that security that you thought you had, well, I've just won. I've just gotten another person to be against those people over there. And then
And
I
those,
can control the whole thing going on.
yeah, those elitist groups, they create the fear and then they create the solution. Boom.
Right. Okay. So that is marketing. We want to talk about how this goes out into the culture. How many products, most of them have been created with the idea of solving a problem that maybe wasn't really a problem. So they make sure, oh, you need to feel bad about the fact that your teeth aren't super white so that you can know that you need my product, right?
Yep.
Or anything, whatever, any of those products.
Yeah.
They first create an insecurity within us and then propose that you buy their thing to assuage your insecurity about it.
Yep.
Right? I mean, and that is exactly the thing that's happening on a spiritual level in these types of groups.
Gray hair, weight loss programs, you name it, they're all out there.
And doesn't it fucking figure that Herbert W. Armstrong was an advertising man?
Exactly. He very much was.
Damn.
Yeah. Wow. All right. Next section now we have shame. All
Hmm.
right. And the first section is pathologized imperfection. And that includes normal human behaviors and mistakes leading to someone being a deviant, and group language, such as you are a sinner, you are selfish, you have pride. All the ways you can tear someone down and make them feel shame.
Let's just go for it. Let's talk masturbation.
Yes, let's talk masturbation.
Okay. Well, guess what? That is a normal thing that humans do. Almost every human does that, needs to do that. It's good for them, good for their body, good for their mind. And what is one of the biggest things that churches goes after?
There you
It's
go.
our own relating to our own bodies.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've mentioned before that for you and I, it was, no, that's for your husband.
Yep.
Okay. Well, so you're controlling me right now, and you're setting me up to be controlled by a man when I'm a grown up. That's a
Mm-hmm.
problem. And think
A huge problem.
about penis owners growing up, right? Like those hormones have got to be pretty wild, making them want to whack it all the freaking time. And
I
so
mean, not
now,
just penis owners, man. I
well,
was
okay,
masturbating from the
that's
moment I could possibly fucking do so when I was a kid.
I didn't figure it out as early as you did. But yes,
The
exactly.
shame, Pat's probably the shame caused you to not. Whereas the shame that was put on me made me want to go and do those things all the more.
But think about the drive of anybody. Okay, you're right, a teenager. Right.
I
So I
get what
think
you're saying. Yeah, they people tend to focus more on boys ensuring that they don't masturbate a lot more than girls. For some reason, that was the case. They just didn't want boys jerking it, and really, they're just talking about them anyway.
so if we're talking about pathologizing a normal human function,
Hmm.
to make a teenager feel like they've sinned against God and against their future spouse, and they're gonna go to hell,
Oh,
and their bodies are dirty every time they feel like rubbing one out. Um, no, that's not okay. Like, think about how that builds up within a person's body, too, of like, I'm gross, I'm yucky. Why do I do this? But I want to do it. But why? I need to stop, but I can't. Like, oh, the crazy making of that is just horrendous. And I think we would have a much better world if we normalized the fact that teenagers need to do that. Okay,
yeah.
not just
Everyone
teenagers,
needs to do it. Yeah.
not just teenagers. I mean, but we know that there's a heightened level of hormonal activity um, at that point that, leads to a whole lot of masturbation as teenagers. And I think there are so many grown ass women walking around this planet that are afraid of exploring themselves, who maybe haven't even like had an orgasm, who would even have a hard time going into a sex shop or shopping online or even thinking about what they might
Yes.
like to explore themselves, to give themselves pleasure. And that shit's so important.
They're embarrassed about it. They do still feel that shame. Like to me, it blows my mind that there are women out there that don't have vibrators. I'm like, what? What do you mean you don't have one? Like it's mind-blowing to me.
There are women who've been married for 40 years and never had an orgasm. What?
I mean,
No,
oh, you poor dears.
right. I mean, bummer for her, but like if she's partnered with anybody, like that's tough if that connection point can't find its fullness. And I've actually attended a class at a sex shop where they were directly talking about women using cannabis as a way to kind of get past some of that internalized shame from their past and be able to really just be present in that moment with their partner and be able to let go and embrace their own pleasure.
The people that fall under this category are extremely insecure. So it would not surprise me if they were to look at things like sex toys as a form of like competition and makes them feel like they're not taking care of the job. I'm like, well, that's not what it's about, actually. It's for personal self satisfaction and care.
Well, and that was my story is I got caught with a toy, and that was when I was directly told. Well, okay, it was a back massager, but same difference. Um, that was when I got told that my body was for my husband. So I mean, that was absolutely clear of like, no, you're not allowed to take your pleasure yourself.
So, next section here under shame is the unrealistic expectations. We have a lot of stories that could cover this. So, that's spiritual standards, social expectations, and rules for our behavior. And there were countless examples of that in our lives.
Just an easy one to think of is the 2+ hour long services that we had every Saturday. And there wasn't like a play area for the kids or a kids church or anything. It was like, nope, you kids sit your little asses down on those cold metal folding chairs and you listen and you watch your parents sit there and take notes.
And social expectations on here. I mean, being expected to be a certain way. If you don't fit into that little box that we've covered so many times, You are the outcast.
So, I mean, I know in the WCG in particular, it was a big deal if you missed a day of church. It wasn't like your standard Lutheran church down the street where people show up or they don't and kind of no one cares. It was like, like they would kind of monitor who was coming in and they would take counts of everybody. And I have heard that if you didn't show up for a while, you'd be getting a call or a visit.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty intentional social control.
And rules for behavior on here. I mean, this topic, I mean, where do we even start? Rules for behavior. They controlled everything. What we ate, what we celebrated, how we spent our spare time, and language too. They tried to control your language, and we delve into that a little bit in our video, Silence to Swearing, where we talk about where people try to get control over how you talk.
That says it, right? They're controlling what goes in, what goes out. And that was a phrase I heard a lot, garbage in, garbage out, right? And so
Ew.
that was that was used to control the music we listened to, the TV shows we watched, right?
Yeah.
Because they understood that if we took in outside ideas, we would now have outside ideas to play with.
It's funny you use the term garbage. Dad used to use that term all the time. And remember, I used to listen to music that was so evil and satanic. Hanson. Okay, I listened to Hanson.
Bop,
Shit like
bop,
bop.
ba, doom, bop.
Yes. Because the middle guy I thought was so cute. I had a big crush on him back in the day. But I remember Dad getting so angry with me one time just because I was listening to Bop or something in my room and he slams my door shut, calling my music garbage. I'm like, thanks. I'm not
Era.
listening to fucking church hymns when I'm a teenager. Give me a break. Okay, and the next section is public humiliation, things like confessions, discipline, and accountability. Churches have definitely done this. They will call out their members and they'll do it very passive aggressively.
Of
Like
course they
Joel
do.
said in his interview, Joel of Mr. Difficult in his interview that we had recently talked about, oh, well, yeah, they didn't call me out by name, but everyone knew it was me. How gross and manipulative.
Well, think of how other churches do that sort of thing. Catholic Church, you straight up are supposed to go sit in a little box next to the priest and tell him all the shit you've done. Like, imagine how that could be used in a small community. Holy fuck.
I can't even picture that. Yeah, sitting in a little confession box. I'm like,
Hell,
I
I
don't even
masturbated
know.
3 times this week. Like, what?
Hit yourself right now.
If you think about evangelical churches, they really like to pat themselves on the back about their accountability groups.
Yeah.
And that goes for everything, but it's my understanding that when you're talking about men's accountability groups, yeah, it's just a big group of men sitting there going like, yeah, I looked at porn this week. Okay. Well, so now you had
Right.
to admit it. So now you had to feel shame when you were trying to engage in a fairly normal human activity.
Mm.
Which by the way, if normal human activities like that are clamped down, it's
Yeah.
gonna come out and it's gonna be weirder. Just saying.
Yeah.
But right, so here's this issue where people in accountability groups are feeling the shame of the things they're struggling with, according to the church themselves. And then they have to go to this group and like say it again in front of people. Like maybe that makes them feel better, but really, I think it just reinforces the shame for the next time it happens because it's a normal human behavior.
Right. And it means that you have absolutely no privacy. And every person, I think, needs to have a certain amount of privacy.
Spend a little time with yourself, not just with your crotch. Like get
Yep.
to know you.
Yeah.
You're cool.
Hmm.
You don't have to air out your dirty laundry in front of everybody else. Maybe you should take a look and realize it wasn't that dirty after all.
And then the last one in the section of shame, we have celebration of self-abuse. The reinforcement of self-punishment and neglect, depicted as things like holy. The villainization of self-care and of your confidence. Basically, self-sabotage.
Okay, so maybe this is not exactly self-abuse, but I would say it's a little bit self-neglect. The idea that my behavior with boyfriends was controlled by the church meant that, it's all going to be around sex here. It meant that my own sexuality didn't get a chance to be its true self,
Mm-hmm.
and so I was neglecting my own ability to engage healthily in relationships
Yeah.
because I had these ideas of how I had to be in those relationships. And then it was celebrated, right? Like, yay, you waited to have sex till you were married. Good job. Okay. Well,
Great.
so what did that
So
get me?
proud.
It actually just kind of made me take a whole lot longer to figure out how to relate to myself and to understand that my pleasure was for me and my body was for me and not for someone else.
You simply chose to share it with someone else, and that was your choice. For me, this one of a self-punishment and neglect, I feel like I missed out on a lot of learning aspects growing up because I was so scared to ask questions. I was afraid of being villainized for not knowing already things that I was supposed to know. I didn't know that learning was a process. I thought I was supposed to have all the answers, and therefore I missed out on opportunities to be able to say, I don't know this. I want to feed my curiosities and go after that. Like, I want to learn about that topic. But I'm like, no, I'm not supposed to go seeking. I'm supposed to already know the answer. So I did terrible in school. I got extremely bad grades because I didn't seek out more knowledge. I thought it was supposed to already be instilled in me in some way.
Right. Like we're just supposed to know and mistakes aren't okay is
And you
so
feel
fucked.
shame. You feel shame for not already knowing the answer. And I had somehow missed that step that I was supposed to go seeking out knowledge on my own. I could use my own brain and my own forms of figuring things out.
That is a turn I didn't expect from a line about self-abuse, but it is totally valid. The idea that we didn't get to explore these parts of ourselves and grow up in those ways like we should have because we were trying to follow the control of our church and our parents. So, I mean, that was our example because thankfully here we are in, 2024. So, I mean, we've been talking about things that are maybe a little more subtle, right? It's those things that we never got to quite embrace about being a human. And so, in some ways, it came across to us as like a self-neglect type thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, the whole idea of organizations that use celebration of self-abuse as a way to control people, I mean, if you think back to medieval times, the idea of being a eunuch, right, was really celebrated within the Christian church for a long time. And because of, I'm not the Bible scholar here, but because of some of the passages that kind of extol the virtues of being
Mm-hmm.
a eunuch, there was literally things like tents set up in the Middle Ages where they understood that there would be some people so convicted that they would want to go ahead and, eunuch guys themselves and like cut off their own balls or something, right? So they literally had a tent for people to do that. So, I mean, I can't think of a grosser, weirder way to celebrate self-abuse than that,
Yeah,
right? There
where
was
you physically
also,
alter your bodies. Yeah.
right, where you're physically altering your body for this religion in a significant way. And around that same time, there were people that would go beyond the idea of being like a monk, right? There was the like vows of, was it asceticism? Taking vows of poverty, right? And like, I'm going to deny myself all of the pleasures this life can offer me in service of God. And so those people were venerated and put on a pedestal for being a man of God, a man of the cloth, or a member of the clergy, right? But that went far too, to the point where there were some people that flagellated themselves, like
Oh
whipped
yeah.
themselves
Yeah.
on purpose.
We
And
see it in movies a lot these days of
yeah,
historical events, right?
and somehow it was done to make themselves feel better, to feel like they were doing it to get into God's good graces because a church of what we can see as high control made them think that.
Can you imagine being that disillusioned to the point where you would actually cut off a part of your body thinking it was righteous. If men these days had more of the option of circumcision, like not having the choice taken away from them as children, but if they wanted to circumcise themselves as adults, how many of them would actually do it?
Let's expand the circle then of a celebration of self-abuse and recognize it's not just self that's getting abused here. There are innocent children who have not made choices to have their bodies altered. And the church celebrates abusing those children by cutting off their foreskin. This happens to boys on the regular, or to penis owners on the regular here in the United States. Although it does not happen many other places in the world. We are very weird in the fact that we cut foreskins off of penises at birth. And, but it goes beyond that too. There are girls there are vulva owners in Africa and other more remote places where there are religions that prioritize removing the clitoris or doing a ritual female circumcision. And both are genital mutilation enacted as a measure of control by a religious organization.
It blows my mind how upset people get over the female genital mutilation, and yet so many people seem to not bat an eye that we are doing it to the males in this country, especially on a daily basis, I think. Just automatically. And why aren't people thinking about it? Like, no, you're mutilating, you're taking away somebody's choice for their bodily autonomy. Maybe they don't want that done. And I can tell you, Pets, being married to someone who still has their foreskin, there are all kinds of senses in that one part of his body alone. That is a fact.
Quantity of nerve endings there are far and away more than the rest of that body part. And they're nerve endings that are specialized, that don't exist in the rest of that body part. So we are doing great harm to penis owners by perpetuating that on them. And this is where this is maybe the last topic we're going to cover for today's, because it's gone on a little while. But that one topic really riles me up, because not only does it exist as a purity control measure, because it was like a big push against masturbation this is oddly the masturbation episode. There was a big push against masturbation at like the turn of the century. And so circumcision was started to be done literally as a way to stop boys from masturbating. Now, it didn't stop it. It made it more difficult, but it was actually a measure of control, like stated as such. But then you layer on the fact that, oh, you mean the medical industry can do that and make a few extra $100 every time a baby's born now? Well, they're not going to let that go. And so then you get the layering of like, oh, well, we should do it for this reason. We should do it for this reason. Okay. Are you going to tell France? Are you going to tell Russia? Are you going to tell the rest of the world that isn't doing it and they're doing just fine? Right? So this is that high control piece visible in the whole world.
I wish my husband could be here to talk on that subject a little more. That's something that there's a lot of Christians in India, but that is something that they do not do over there. They do not circumcise. And
but here in this country, Christians think they're doing it because the Bible tells them to, when it does not.
It does not. Nope.
Right.
Nope.
I mean, and why would they let the Bible tell them what to do anyway? But okay. Ugh.
Shame and guilt, Patty.
Oh, power and control, Nancy.
Makes me so angry.
I mean, yeah, it's easy to try to laugh at it, or that's us like trying to deal with our discomfort about the topic. But yeah, I mean, that is some serious shit. Like how much can be controlled about other people.
I think back to when I was young, I had so many thoughts going in my mind. Obviously, I had nowhere to go with them. So that's why I was able to like just get them out on paper or whatever I needed to do, because it couldn't go anywhere. But there were so many questions I could have asked at the time had I had the confidence and felt like it was safe for me to do so. because I questioned things like even circumcision when I was young. It just didn't make sense to me at all. I'm like, wait, you're telling me people are literally ripping the skin off their penis when they're born? Well,
Hmm.
like, why are
It's
they born
attached to
with
the
it
head
then?
when it's born too.
But that was the question in my mind that I never actually felt comfortable enough to ask. I'm like, well, why the fuck is it born like that then? You know, it made perfect sense to me, but of course, somehow I knew not to ask the question.
I mean, God just wanted to put it there so he could slice it off. Yay.
And he just put dinosaurs there to test our faith with evolution, right?
Yeah. Well, I don't think we solved the world's problems, but if more people see these methods of high control, that might make something different for them.
So we just covered shame. Next time we'll go over the isolation and insulation, loss of bodily autonomy, justifications. We'll cover sex and gender control and economic control.
I want to do my own version of the positive side of this wheel, like a wheel of healthy relationships.
I think there's some out there, but we can
Yeah.
look at this wheel and just look at the opposite end of it and say, this is how you actually should be treating people. Because I think I still have a little bit of fear. Like, I don't want to control other people. I don't want to come off as manipulative either. And we might be
Yes.
doing it without even realizing it. So these are good things
Yes.
to study.
That really is the insidious part of this. If this is the only demonstration of humans relating to each other that you've been familiar with, I don't know how you can move away from that and either expect anything else or do anything else yourself.
Right.
Well, all right, that's all we could get through for today. So thanks for joining us here on this episode of Apostate Sisters. Join us for part 2. Aw, sending love. Your body is yours, and no one else can tell you what to do with it.
Show love to yourself, even if that's in the form of a vibrator. See ya. Bye.